Live. Systems, all systems go. IT is good. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to support our Regional Transportation Planning Committee meeting. Today is Wednesday, April 20th. I'm Steve Iacetta. It's a privilege to serve as your chair for these meetings. Appreciate it very much. Fly over and introduce ourselves as a first item as introduction. Item 1 on our agenda. Sandy?
Sure. Sandy Misowitz, CDTC.
Jacob Beeman, CDTC.
Greg Richter, Regional DOT.
Yeah, Bob Rice, New York DOT.
Patrick Jordan, Port of Albany. Andrew Kreshik, City of Troy.
Mark Castiglione, CDRPC.
Josie Graves, City of Cohoes. Ross Farrell, CDTA.
Around the table.
John Scavo, Town of Brooklyn Park.
Liz Cormos, Village of Bolton Spa.
Mike Valentine, Saratoga County. Chris Wallen, City of Schenectady.
Randy Milano, City of Albany.
Mike Butler, Mechanical.
Mark Hammond, Town of Malta.
Kristen Diaz, City of Schenectady.
Around the wall, Adam.
And Migelski, Town of East Greenwich.
Federal Highway Administration. Jen Spahn, CDTC. Terry Ward, CDTC.
Ryan Riper, Town of Wilton.
Rob Leslie, Town of Bethlehem.
Kyle Simon, CDTC.
Chris Bowers, CDTC.
Very good. Full quorum. Thank you very much once again. Are there any visitor issues wishing to address the CDTC Planning Committee at this time? Item 2. Once, going twice, hearing none. We move to administration, which is adoption of our prior meeting minutes of April 6th. We did about 2 weeks ago. Motion to adopt the minutes, please. They were distributed online.
Yep.
Thank you, staff. Thank you, Randy. Second by
Andrew? Oh, Pat, sorry, I didn't see who raised their hand over there.
Thank you, Pat. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any abstaining? First action item is hereby adopted. The action items today are the TIP program update for 2022 through 2027, our 5-year plan. That's our focus. And Sandy Misowitz, Executive Director, will guide us.
Great, thanks, Steve. So the primary agenda item today is to work through the Transportation Improvement Program update and begin the process of assigning the federal transportation dollars to projects. As you may recall, at our previous meeting, we reviewed some of the information related to the funding available and terminology that we use, the planning target or the budget estimate. Since we met, we've had some revisions to those. So we'll talk about those in a minute. I did want to just say that the candidate project evaluations and fact sheets have been posted on our webpage for your review. Because of the number of pages, we did not print copies for those of you in the room. There's a lot of good material there. It's really intended for public consumption as well as for you folks to ponder and think about things as we talk through these programming options post meeting, in case there's a question you had about a particular project or how things were evaluated. I'll also remind you that we use the evaluation process that our staff here worked over this last year that you folks adopted and approved with the policy board. We use that evaluation procedure to assign the total scores to those projects. They're organized by project types, sort of broad project categories like pavement preservation, pavement beyond preservation, which in our terminology is really the major reconstruction of a roadway, a full depth reconstruction in some cases, or projects that have a lot of features like additional sidewalks or a widening of a shoulder or some additional work beyond just simple overlay of a new layer of pavement. So we are going to approach the programming process using those broad categories, which are consistent with what's in our New Visions Regional Transportation Plan to guide the programming process. So on the agenda, like I said, all of the information related to the evaluations is on our website. Within the spreadsheets, the candidates are sorted not only by the project type, but they're also sorted by the total project score from highest to lowest. So you can see basically within category how they were quote ranked. The evaluations are meant to guide. They're not meant to be, the end all be all of every decision that gets made here, but the primary purpose of the evaluation step is to not only identify projects that are of good quality for programming, but to connect our long-range plan principles for the region with the federal funds. So just want you guys to keep that in mind as we work through this process. Does anybody have any questions about the candidate projects themselves, the fact sheets, or the evaluations at this point before we move forward?
Questions?
So we'll start with, Jacob's going to share some information regarding the changes in the budget that we'll need to discuss from our previous meeting. It's a couple of things have changed in this last 2 weeks.
So again, last meeting, a few weeks ago, we went over our preliminary planning targets and we just had a few changes. So the first table we're going to show just kind of for information purposes. These are the planning targets that were for the total 8-county region 1. We have no change, total of about $595 million. From that, we whittle it down to our CDTC region planning targets. And this is kind of our revised table. So we've added about $14 million to year 1 to kind of offset some of the additional roll-in that we have. So from last time, we've got a total of 14 million more, $392 million will be our total CDTC region programming amount. And then, so previously we've adopted our existing TIP roll-in. So again, we approved this last meeting, about $86 million of existing TIP project roll-in. And that's going to eat away at our first 2 years of programming, leaving us with about $306 million of new project programming. So this should match our tables that we provided in the, so we've got it labeled CDTC multi-site and project funding impact. And that is going to be the kind of the first number that we're shooting for. So overall dollars available for new programming, multi-site and site-specific projects. So from there, I think we'll get into kind of our discussion of those multi-site and set-aside projects.
Did anybody have any questions regarding the change in the planning target or the budget that we're starting with?
Jacob, this is Andrew on Zoom. On our end, we just see the first slide in PowerPoint. I think what you're seeing in the room is different from what we're seeing on Zoom. Are you in presenter mode?
Was.
Now we can see the third slide.
Right. So now you can see my full PowerPoint.
We see, yeah, we see you scrolling up and down through the slides now. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Real quick for then those online. Our first number, which is what we previously started with last meeting, total region 1, $595 million. Our changes come in our CDTC region planning targets, which we've increased by $14 million in year 1. So we bring that up to $392 million of total CDTC region. We take out our existing roll-in that we've previously approved, which leaves us with $306 million of new programming. That, Andrew, that come in?
Yes, we saw that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so any other questions? Now, and I apologize, we're still working through the technology challenges with Zoom. Okay, so the next piece of this puzzle, now that we have resolved the existing projects and their budgets on the schedules, we move into some what we have traditionally called regional set-asides. We're also sort of revamping how we're thinking about that term. So in the past, what a set-aside would mean for those that haven't been here for a long time is that we would reserve some amount of money for a type of project that would be drawn down upon either on a competitive basis or by a lead sponsor, in most cases, NISDOT and CDTA, because they have certain needs that some of the local governments don't necessarily have. And a lot of their projects, we're going to sort of shift the thinking away a little bit from just a set aside, but we're going to call them multi-site projects or programs. So for example, we have the CDTC table has traditionally supported the traffic management center, which is not really a project, it's more of a program, right? So we're just going to be relabeling some things as we move forward. So just some of the shift in terminology, you'll hear me say the multi-site projects would be something like if they're doing pavement markings on a particular series of roadways in the region at different locations, that's a multi-site project. So it's not really a set aside where we're drawing down and approving a TIP amendment here, like we have done in some cases in the past. So we do have proposals on the table from both CDTA and from NISDOT. We're going to start with the CDTA set aside. There was a letter in your packet that sort of explains the request being made by CDTA. I'll give Ross the opportunity to kind of talk through that a little bit and what they're asking of the planning committee and the policy board ultimately. So Ross, why don't you go ahead and explain that?
Sure, thanks, Sandy. And this is tied into what DOT is going to ask for with their set of stuff, whatever terms we're going to be calling it. So one thing you'll see is that there's a reduction of about 15% in our set aside. The funding source does change though. It goes from mainly NHPP with some STP flex. This is what you'll see from DOT's proposal. Is a switch that they're going to be taking on more NHPP, which then allows us to move our funding request to STP urban. Ultimately, that then, if you follow the dominoes down, leads there to be more STP flex for the region. It's basically right in front of you, but yes, it's roughly a 15% decrease from prior. Funding source changes to STP urban. The one thing to keep in mind, though, is after this step, CDTA does not submit any of the projects for the solicitation. So the reason why we have the set aside set up in this way is because of the fact that we don't actually compete for whatever money is going to be left at the table. So this is the slice for CDTA related to our BRT projects.
You will, if you want to just speak to the change in the two, going from the two set asides to the one.
Yeah, so sorry, the other part of that is before we had a TDM multimodal set aside, the vast majority of that, even though it was posted on the tip for about 600,000, 460,000 of that per year is funded by CDTA, with the remaining 140 from the tip. The difficulty in getting our new multimodal programs funded with these sources come up again and again and again. It's just difficult to fund programs such as scooters or bike share with these existing fund sources. So that's part of that reduction. It's just outright eliminating the multimodal TDM set aside, which is part of the reduction in the STP flex funds. None of the programs, though, that we offer will go away. They'll just be funded by CDTA internally. So bikes, scooters, car share, flex micro transit, everything that's under that suite of services by CDTA with multimodal and TDM is still going to be funded.
Any questions for us about the request?
None.
And we're gonna reserve action. until,
Reserve action to.
Yep.
The next item.
Yep, we want to walk through both and then we'll take them together. Yep. Okay, so the second set of requests comes from the Department of Transportation. There is a summary of their request. Nine multi-site projects and programs totaling $96 million. So I wanted to give the department an opportunity to explain their request.
Yeah, so, as described, we decided to really manage changes here to sort of rebrand how we label this group of projects that we just historically put on the tip. What this has always been is a representation of 8 county work, because we try to get after various preservation portions of our network via multi-site work, which is very efficient on the scale that we deliver these projects. Everything from 8 county pavement markings to 8 county paving to bridge preservation and such. Also contained here is the TMC, and then some smaller set asides for guide rail, large culvert replacements, with all the things shown. So one thing we did in this round was in the last tip update, this group of projects was subscribing to around $14 to $15 million of Flex and Urban combined in the 5 years. As you see, we've backed that down to 2.9 million to, again, try and free up the flexible money that I guess I call the anywhere money as far as federal money goes. So we've intentionally pulled ourselves out of that bucket with the use of some state funds that were made available this time around. So that's the overall synopsis of this ask. It's a large number, but I'm open to questions if there are any related to it. We'll also say that I believe in the last 5-year update, we did ask for 118 here. This time we're at 96. So again, we tried to reduce. Done with rustic, that helps. Some other things we're trying to be efficient on combining. We no longer have a slope repair set aside. We no longer have, there's a couple that we decided they were just inefficient as a standalone, so they're getting combined into bigger things.
That total represents for projects in all 8 counties then?
No, this is the
Just the
CDTC portion
CDTC portion. Okay.
of the 8 county work. So that's a much bigger number for the 8 counties, but this is about 55% of the 8 county spending.
Rick, you mentioned that state money is offsetting some of the federal money. Can you talk us through, I mean, is that sustainable across and sticky across the 5 years of the TIP?
Yes.
Okay.
I will say for today, yes. That everything is subject to change, but it seems like so far this is holding.
Is that sticky or sticking?
Sticking.
Okay, I heard stinky. Greg, what happens in year 5?
Yeah, we may smooth this out as part of the tip build. We may. So it's front loaded. There's some programming numbers here that we may be able to put a little more in year 5 and year 4 and smooth this over a little better. But yeah, I mean,
When's our next tip update?
We usually do it lately every 3 years.
That was what my question is that in 3 years, will that year 5 then go to $25 million, $28 million? You know what I mean? Are we,
it'll
is that what we're trying to do? Is show the front and then leave the back, and then when you come, you show the front, you leave the back.
no.
You keep doing, it's okay. I mean, hey, it's fine. I just wanted to.
There are some-
practice the same thing.
As it gets, it's obligation dates in our system that generate these tables, and we still have to move to the final obligation dates. So we are going to smooth this out a little bit.
Another thing to keep in mind in this, it's a bookkeeping thing, I think, between the state and the MPO. The MPO does a 4-year tip, and we have a 5th year that we have just carried forward an assumption of the budget for year 5. The state only recognizes years 1 to 4. So that's why that year 5 is a little squishy.
Yeah.
But it does afford us the opportunity, as Greg said, as we go through this programming process, to smooth things out by fund source and by year. And where, once we get through this part of the exercise, we're going to go fund source blind and year blind for the remainder of our conversation. We wanted to show the set asides and multi-site projects this way because it did matter, particularly for CDTA, to make sure that their request was in the correct years, as well as some of the DOT set aside projects as well. So, any other questions?
With these set asides, what does the year 1 and 2 remaining funds look like?
So we want to show us the next slide, because this is why we wanted to, this would be the impact. If the planning committee chooses to approve both of those scenarios, the impact would be looking at year 1, and again, the numbers by year are a little flexible. The thing to really look at is the total by fund source. And like I said, after this conversation, we're gonna go fund source blind a little bit. The NHPP, the National Highway Performance Program funds, which are limited to the National Highway System and bridges for the most part, is the biggest dollar value. As you may recall, when we talked about the impact of the new federal transportation bill, the new infrastructure law, the biggest increase in funding made available was in that NHPP fund source, which in a way makes sense, right? It's part of the National Highway System. It's dealing with important bridges. That's where the biggest increase was. The STP Flex and the STP Urban, which is the Surface Transportation Program funding, as Greg said it a little earlier, those have the widest flexibilities, are the most valued fund source for that reason, but we didn't see the same increases there. The only difference between the flexible funds and the urban funds is where we can use them. The urban funds are really limited to the Albany, Schenectady urbanized area. The flexible funds can be used anywhere in the capital region. So that's the subtle difference there. The next fund source, the Highway Safety Improvement Program, the HSIP fund source, is a data-driven fund source. It's been a little challenging to use, but it also received an increase in the infrastructure law. Because safety is very important. And then that final fund source, the STP System Bridge, you see, really, we didn't get an allocation in that. There's some lingering funds in year 1 that we're grappling with, but truthfully, there really isn't an allocation in that fund source. So the net effect is obviously the almost $100 million of the programming capacity is going to go to these two groups of projects brought to us from CDTA and NISTOT.
Does Flex and Urban, those two numbers there, 45, does that reflect money that was forsaken by DOT as far as? All right, does that, I'm just looking maybe a comparison the last time through, if those two categories have increased in funding due to your pull out of those, out of Flex and
Total available is not increased to the region or to the MPO. So we reduced how much we're trying to subscribe to.
that's what I was trying to look for last time to this time, if the money's coming in before.
And we're using less of it this time than we did last time.
Using less, but the funding that was categorized for that has not changed.
Looking at your funding request with the STP Flex portion, looking at the multi-site program project requests and how the STP or STBG Flex is utilized in that, what is the need for STP Flex to even be used and in lieu of NHPP funds? Why is that there?
The two categories we're trying to keep it is the culverts. It's to do culverts that are not on the NHS, but on a federal aid road. And then same for traffic signals. You can, if the signal's not on the NHS, we can't use NHPP. So those are the only two categories we try to keep some of it.
And that's not something that local could do. DOT has to administer that. Why is the funding going to you rather than?
It's part of an 8-county plan of the projects. If there's a desire for a locally subscribed true set aside to go after signal work, it's never been we don't object to any committee decided
Right.
blocks.
And why is it you have the 1 year on, 1 year off, 1 year on, 1 year off, or 2 years off, then 3 years on for
The culvert replacement, we know the next 2 years' plans are primarily on the NHS, so we're one is getting obligated before the tip update, so that's why it's not shown in year one of the culverts. Year two, we know the candidates are all on the NHS for that year. But then year three, it's fairly certainty that we're going to be going off the NHS culvert plan. And then the signals, our historical letting of signals is 1 year we let a signal replacement contract to build brand new signals. And then the following year we let what's called the where and when, where that's a state fund contract, which is our repair contractor that runs around and does all the emergency signal repair. So that's why it's shown every other year. We stagger the contracts. They're both 2-year contracts, but let one year and let the other next.
And is federal fiscal year 26 and 27 placeholders essentially? Could that
27 is, and well, 26 will revisit 3 years anyway.
because it goes up significantly all for the culvert, but if it's anticipated that more local work would be getting done in later stages, as opposed to asking less, and just kicking a little bit back into the kitty.
Well, I mean, we'll definitely revisit it in 3 years.
Yeah, no, I'm just laying some groundwork for conversation that's going to occur later.
No, that's fine.
Okay, thank you.
You know what the total was for the non-CDTA and non-DOT projects the last time?
Yes, do we have that number handy?
I don't on the top of my head. Andrew,
We'll look it
Yes.
up.
did you hear that question?
You want the total non-DOT, non-CDTA from the prior tip?
Yeah, and I think that should be in one of those PowerPoint slides that we'd sent back and forth.
Okay, I'll see if I can dig it up and I'll let you know.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions on the table? I will overview, do more with less, prudent and feasible in all regards.
Right. And, keep in mind, stepping backwards, the ask of both CDTA and NISDOT is lower than what we had in 2019, but we had a larger roll-in this time. So when we look at the overall budget, when you're thinking about what's impacting what, that roll-in really did have an impact on what's going to be available for new projects. Because unfortunately, even with the increases from the infrastructure law, whatever was allocated or to CDTC, a lot of that got taken up right there.
One thing I would like to add to one thing I want to add is the program update instructions from across the whole state, and there still exists a DOT only preservation mandate. They heard everyone loud and clear when they tried to do a preservation mandate for all, and that was not popular. So they have backed off to only requiring DOT projects to meet a mandated minimum spending amount across the counties. And here in Region 1, we were mandated 99 million a year, and this block of projects is one efficient way we get after some of that 99 million. So that's sort of where we sort of baked in the plan.
Mandate was an interesting choice of words in the program instructions, given that this body does have the ability to vote on and approve their proposal. So, I'm not saying that you want to dismantle their proposal, but there certainly is, opportunity for discussion and conversation at this table. The mandate doesn't mean this is how you have to do things. If this is what was the language that they chose to use in the program instructions was an interesting choice of words.
99 is statewide internal mandate for preservation.
8 counties, all 8 counties.
5% CDTC.
And this is part of the preservation. The rest of it is planned preservation projects. And it is consistent with the mandates. It's consistent with the transportation asset management plan that is required by federal highway, which gets after all the performance measures that are outlined in all the highway bills. So as much as it comes down from the state, it is the state's plan that is up to the feds and approved back from the feds back to the state to manage the network. It's up and down and across. So it's the layers of, it's all how we try to efficiently get after this. Meet all the performance metrics.
Yeah, so Greg, a question, say Steve asked it. So when we had the conversation about the preservation sort of goal, rather than mandate, the goal. In order to tackle the preservation goal, there are other ways to do that. One of the things we did last time was we had a local road set aside. It was a small amount of money, but it was a way to do preservation work consistent with the asset management plan for the state, but not necessarily on state roads. So can you speak a little bit to that a little bit?
So because they reduced the preservation bar, they only are applying it to the state system, leaving the flexibility for everyone else to do what they want with the system everyone else is responsible for. We encourage everyone to do preservation of their system as well, but we no longer drive the bus in that direction off of our system. So if the body wants to earmark local preservation dollars, they can, but they don't count towards the threshold set for the state system. And because DOT owns well north of 80, if not 90% of the federal aid system, there's logic. There's logic where they set that goal.
Rick, when you say preservation, is it bridge and pavement?
Bridge, pavement, there's a bunch of other things that count. Guide rail counts, TMC counts in the preservation bucket. Everything in those, the RG tip IDs that we propose, everything in here counts in the preservation bucket.
These all count.
All count.
And even within those, Chris, and with the multi-county, multi-site contracts, I mean, we're well behind any sort of life cycle analysis on the signal replacements we should be doing
20, 25 years worth.
and we're doing 5 a year, right? So that's all in the preservation bucket.
I'll say one other thing, the list of multi-site projects or programs the department is requesting, they're not necessarily new. We've had them on our books for many tips, whether it's the bridge preservation works and the culvert replacements, the help truck program on the Northway and the interstate system. So a lot of these things are familiar to you folks. They are important to the region as a whole. But it's just it's a dollar value ask that's just going to impact what's remaining. We just wanted to make sure folks understood that as we head towards approval or motion.
Yeah, the other thing is, we could get in the weeds with everybody, I guess, in a way, but the state's unique is that, I mean, you do have also a state budget allocation for work, correct? I mean, Governor does his budget, the DOT has state money, right? It's not a complete like overhead and then federal aid projects to do these kind of things, right? So there's a blend of Region 1 money, right? There's state and there's federal.
There is, and the state is handed to us with enough to match the federal aid. And then the balance of it is generally into our emergency buckets, bridge, and they're called where and when now, bridge where and when, pavement where, highway where and when, signal where and when. You know, but it's,
Yeah, those are the only really completely state funded projects. So they're like demand response kind of stuff. And I mean, the operations budget, snow and ice, that's the largest sort of share of the 100% state funded pot. But like Greg said, it's only those couple projects that are 100% state funded right now. So
predominantly match, and you know, this round there was enough, there was basically enough to get us out of the flex and urban bucket as much as possible. But it couldn't get out 100%, but we reduced it by what? I mean, it went from 14 to less than 3. So you know, that's reflective of some state money. That's why we used it. We didn't try to. It's not another pot of gold.
No?
So I was just asking about the non-DOT, non-CDTA projects, just so the folks around the table could understand how much of the state infrastructure bill benefited this table or not. Like, was there a windfall that went to this table or not? So I don't know.
In comparison to 2019? No. If, I believe the increase last time, when Andrew's got it now, but I think it was a 3% increase, which is not even the rate of inflation.
Yes, I did pull up the slide that Jacob mentioned. Before, so this was shared at the last planning committee, but before roll-in, then the FY 19 to 24 tip, the planning target was 336, and then in the current tip, it was 378 for an increase of 12%. But after roll-ins are accounted for, as Sandy mentioned, it only went up 3% from 282 million to 292 million. I can't find something analogous to the slide you're viewing, which would take into account the set-asides. I don't think we have that prepared, but I'll keep looking.
And the set-aside requests were larger last time, so, you know, the impact would be, you know, at least another $30 million.
We used the state ones we did see some of. We used to reduce our asks here so that there is more this time, hopefully for everyone else at the table to program projects with federal aid. I don't have the exact delta, but we definitely are really trying to reduce our asks to maximize the local program here.
And one other thing to keep in mind is, which is new, well, it's not brand new, but it's relatively new, is the state has been increasing using state funds, a state touring route program that allows locals to utilize state money to do some transportation work in their communities. That's an opportunity that didn't exist I would say about what, 2019, even a year ago. Last year was the first year of that touring route program. So that is a shift. You know, the state at the state level is trying, you know, in its way, I think, to change and shift the use of federal aid versus state funds, because the state funds are frankly easier for you folks to use. The federal funds come with a lot of administrative responsibilities and requirements that are difficult for particularly smaller local governments to manage. So even some of the cities, you folks who work in the cities know, even for you guys, it's not always easy. So there is an increase in the state budget, at least for this year, in the state touring route program, which is going to give you folks access to some funds that we're not even talking about here. But when we're just solely isolating the federal aid, the net effect of the infrastructure law is it really didn't increase much. And again, part of the reason is the large roll-in we had. And if you think about it, we talked about this in the last meeting, we had a COVID crisis, projects weren't moving. We've got a materials shortage, we've got cost increases due to inflation, we've got a number of challenges in delivering projects on time in that budget, which is impacting the program as well.
The one thing maybe to submit to the committee too is, we have the project fact sheets for all the local projects, for some of DOT's projects, for all DOT's projects. I mean, I'm not as familiar with, Greg, some of the programs you just talked about, like, I mean, the TMC is $10 million over 5 years. I mean, what are we getting for that,
So various components between the ITS network that keeps growing, the signs and the awareness and the traffic management and 24/7 monitoring. So it's not cheap.
Operation.
Yeah, I mean, it's
not.
there's
So
a
there's
mix.
infrastructure related to it, all the variable message signs you see and that such and that.
Dozens, hundreds, how many are you up to in our region? 4 counties.
Probably get north of 100.
Yeah.
Hundreds of variable message signs for traffic.
That are all connected wirelessly network. So we're co-hosts with the state police at the facility. I mean, demand response, accident clearance, I mean, all that is light years from where it was even a decade ago.
It's 24/7.
24/7 continuous.
365, obviously.
I certainly think there's a broader point here. And I know Steve and I talked about, I mean, sitting at the table here for a number of years, the core formula driven part of the program is small. And, with the nature of it. And I appreciate Ross in particular, that sort of laying out that I think FTA was a little bit, ahead of this with the discretionary programs and sort of where you need to be in advance to be ready to go out for grant development. And, I know Maria mentioned last time and, 60 something plus discretionary programs on the federal side in this bill, and 60% of the funding is 40% discretionary. 40% is discretionary. So, that's sort of the nature of it. That they're not just taking the population and dividing it and then putting it around the tables here. And then, and the state has done the same thing with, the I-81s and whatever. They're taking a couple billion off the top to fund those sort of programs. So it does, this isn't a dissimilar conversation than any urban area around the state here. But it's
Important context to see the big picture from my altitude on how we got where we are and where we're going.
We've been trying to be transparent because we know the expectations from all of us with the infrastructure bill is that there's going to be this increase in funding to do stuff. At this table, that's not how it played out. And that's unfortunate, but that's the reality. And it's going to impact, we didn't have the information we have now back when we solicited for local projects. And so a lot of people were asking for big things, and we're just not going to have the funds to do it all. That's going to make the next piece of this challenging to work through, but we'll get there.
we're optimistic to get the Livingston Ave Bridge funded, and the $300 million is more than we're talking about.
Correct.
Like,
So any additional questions? And, we are going to be looking for a motion on both the CDTA request as well as the NISDOT request. But any more questions or conversation before we move on?
Pleasure of the committee is to vote on them together or separately. And can I get a sense of the committee as to whether we could entertain a motion for both together? Would people be comfortable making a motion and moving on that? Are we comfortable? More discussion at this time is welcome also.
I don't want to put together.
Prefer them separately.
both, right? Do you want them separate?
Together, we'll go together, see, where are we? How about a show of hands to see if we're 50-50 split? like the country, or we need to rule by consensus, but it is the pleasure of the committee for this administrative item. What do you think? All in favor of jointly, raise a hand. How about that? I see less than half, so we'll be individual items. Thank you. All right, so that's protocol here, and we want to do which one first?
We'll just take them in the order that they were presented. So we'll start with the CDTA, set aside.
Motion.
Second.
So who made the first motion?
Joe. And we're comfortable, no further discussion, we got the good overview. All in favor, please say aye, raise your hand. Aye. Any abstaining or opposed? Hearing none, adopted, thank you. And secondly, the DOT. Adam, second by Chair, Adam, Ross Farrell, thank you, second by Ross Farrell. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any abstaining or opposed? Hearing none. Adopted. Thank you. Now we can move forward.
Great, thanks, everyone. So now that we have established the foundation, as I said at the beginning, we're going at this point, we're going to forget about what kind of fund source it is, and we're just going to focus on that $191 million figure as our target for budgeting. What we presented in the provided to you online are 3 programming scenarios. They are labeled from a NISDOT proposed programming scenario, a CDTC evaluation proposed scenario, and then a CDTC balanced proposed scenario. We're going to talk a little bit about the distinctions between these 3 scenarios. And, you know, you folks have a lot of influence on, you know, where we go from here. These are simply being presented as guidance. You do not have to follow these as they're presented. They're really intended to just give you guys all some food for thought of how we can approach the programming. We tried to be consistent within the different scenarios on the overall dollar value emphasis by project type as best we could. The individual projects may change depending on the scenario. So we'll start with the NISDOT proposed programming scenario.
Sandy, before we start, how far do you expect that we are going to go today?
I'm gonna close this meeting at 11:30. So if we need more time, you know, to work through this, we'll see where we are at that point. If we need to schedule another meeting either next week, for sure, we're gonna meet on our normal date and time on May 4th. Thank you. So just a question of how far we get today. Okay. So we'll start with the NISDOT proposed scenario. I'll let Greg and Bob sort of describe their approach here and allow you guys to ask any questions you may have.
So again, this by no means is this is meant to just be discussion only. This is not us pushing anything, any direction, but it's really, we start at looking at everyone's top priority project and the funding available, and trying to go after a mix of all projects by project types and such. The other thing to consider as you look at what we came up with, we have a handful of projects where in the funding proposed, we have a design only indicator. And that's layered in there as part of this huge discretionary program we're talking about. If we have some large asks here that are hard, that are challenging to fund with core funds, is there an appetite of the committee to fund someone for design only, where you can get a design off the ground and get it through NEPA or almost to NEPA, and then you're really competitive for the discretionary programs as they continue to roll out. All the discretionary programs, at least the ones so far, come with a rather tight timeline to get construction authorized. About 18 months, I think we're seeing. So the reason you're seeing a lot of design only indicated is the idea of, we can't fund everything. We can fund more projects, get them off the ground and get them more competitive for 40% of the federal bill that is not made available to us.
Can we stick with that point for
Yeah,
some
let's talk
discussion?
about
Yeah, yeah.
this.
Because I'm looking and saying, okay, if we go design only, and some of them, I'd say, yeah, I don't mind that at all for myself. And others probably say the same thing. What do we do though, if we put design into this tip? Project has design funding. 2 years out, after everybody's gone through everything after design and all of a sudden they say, geez, we don't have, department doesn't have money, federal funds aren't there for it or whatever. Or there's so maybe there's a lack of interest locally in that project or something. What do you do when you've got something established and it has the potential to fall apart?
There's two layers. First is the other layer of the highway bill is the 10-year rule went away. So there's no, the old risk of having to pay your money back has been removed.
Altogether?
As we understand it, yeah, altogether.
Altogether.
So,
Well, that's a big bump. then.
so that's piece of the new puzzle number one.
It's sort of been replaced with it. Well, you need to refresh in your design determination prior to the advertisement, regardless of the scope. So whether it's, I could imagine you put a project together that's done 2 years later.
I'm thinking of anything from political change in the local area.
It depends upon what category you have. I mean, you have a number of bike ped design onlys. I see them as being more risky in a design component, as well as a bridge preservation, or I'm sorry, a bridge design only, than looking at a more traditional project where the progression, I mean, there is momentum to get that done. And my concern is that a design only creates a potential disconnect to effectively finishing the project because of that separation between design and construction.
Yeah, I would say just the opposite too.
Yeah.
I'm looking at it saying it's a great incentive for municipality, whether it's a county, city, town.
But there's no guarantee of your construction funding. You might get
Well, no, you're right.
credit.
I'd say it increases your likelihood, but it
Yeah.
also, the
There's
biggest
no
variable for
guarantee.
me is always been right away in that time frame,
That's
in the
the time.
time frame from design to construction, to secure that right away. If I have a solid design, I can have better predictability as to what my right of way timing is for the next cycle in 3 years to apply for construction funds.
I agree with
What if
that
you're
one.
suggested for design only and your right of way is negligible? It's not an issue.
That's a good problem to have. That's,
Well, right away pops up though, unexpectedly as you start,
yeah, I've had projects where I didn't think I had right of way
Right.
issues until they're out there.
I understand, but I'm just looking at this as when I have the package fully funded, it's complete. There's no contingencies, there's no potentialities existing out there
no, you're right.
that have to be reduplicated. And if the design is delayed, is there a necessity to redesign components, which thus creates further delay and cost?
Well, and I agree. I was going through this scenario, going through papers and stuff, and I'm looking at that with the design stuff, and I'm saying, okay, we don't really have a fully funded TIP project. And like I said, there are those things outside that could mess it up, that you could and you could wind up going even around here, that when somebody comes back and they say, I want to take it beyond that, people around the table are different. They may not be an interest in that certain, help with that project go along or something.
I brought up the bike ped specifically because I remember we had an enhancement project where the longer it went, the more rotating ownership or potential to purchase or get an easement right away, et cetera. Properties went. By delaying that, that scenario could also play out where you have a willing person or entity to provide you that land for your trail now, but not later. Now, obviously, the opposite could be true as well, but why would you propose it unless it's not ready now?
So what I'm hearing is that it makes sense to consider the momentum of a project, the prioritization. of a project.
I think you're looking at not only momentum, but who's making that application?
We all know things are more difficult to control. Across the board. So,
Only
I don't
driving
want to
on one-way
say, you
streets.
got their unicorn. But from my perspective, I think the bigger issue is capacity and equity. Because if you do design only, and you have a community that does not have the wherewithal to hire a grant writer to grant dollars, is there a mechanism to?
So, one other suggestion in design only is in your scope of services, add grant writing. Because these proposals, these applications are time consuming, and if you get consultants on board that can do that as part of their service.
Just for clarification, with the design funding, there is no obligation for the project to be constructed with the federal funding, or is there an obligation for the project to be constructed once you've spent money to design it?
With that,
I know with HUD funds, it's like you don't meet a national objective till you complete the project. So once you put money into it, you really got to finish it. I don't know if it's the same with this.
With the sunset of the 10-year rule, that requirement from federal highway is.
You just explained just for those in the room what the
Okay,
10-year rule
so the
was.
10-year rule was so the federal highway version of exactly what you said is, if you obligate design, you have 10 years to either procure right away or build your project. So yes, there used to be a commitment. You start and you have to finish within 10 years.
Or lose your money.
Or you have to pay your
You gotta
design.
pay.
Yeah, and that's what,
So,
yeah, that's what I'm familiar with.
So
But
the-
you're saying,
this new highway bill, I mean, this is brand new. This is
right,
hot off the presses. That requirement is no longer tied to federal highway dollars.
so if people spend design money and then say whatever happened, like Andrew bringing up concerns, the project never happens, nothing happens.
Nothing happens. You stop.
But sometimes
Not
it's
the first
actually
government to waste
a
money.
good thing if the project has to get completed, because then you know that it's gonna be supported in construction.
I just don't feel that there's no repercussions for not finishing. You know, it's-
So
I was looking at ain't no
couple-
freight.
I was looking at a couple points with design only. It looked like DOT scenario provided a greater distribution of the funds to local municipalities that allow us to go back to our elected officials and show to the citizens we're doing something, even if it's design. We're going to methodically look at it. We're going to build consensus towards the construction based on the alternative design solution. Two, I think if shovel-ready projects are solicited in the future for federal funds, we have a pool of projects that have gone through design and should be shovel-ready. And I would say the other thing with the grant writing that we may want to just consider is if we're using federal funds, we want to just make sure it doesn't debar them from being able to bid on the construction and design ends. So we've always used local funds for grant writing, so we don't mix the two, but.
The details of that can be worked out. I do know that the local projects manual has the language in there of how to procure grant writing and then not preclude them from other services.
Gotcha.
The language is in the local projects manual.
Is that some guidance that can be distributed?
Everyone,
Well, in a digestible format?
yeah,
Greg, are the design only projects on here? I'm just looking to see is that between the DOT, like for example, I don't know if this was a error, but the town of Glenville's project is on all three lists, but only on your list does it say design only, but then none of the other design only projects are on the lists.
So the CDTC scenarios, just for simplicity, we didn't get into design only.
No, I noticed that, but what I didn't know is, did all of these requests for design only, with the exception maybe of town of Glenville request design only, and then it was a compromise for town of Glenville.
No,
We did have independent.
we just,
Yeah,
we tried to, we played with scenarios to hit the max funding left. And
Oh, so you were the one who just said, what if we just did design?
what if we just design all?
This is just
This
a
is-
proposal,
for
so
discussion.
none of the
Discussion only.
sponsors have had any say in this, so that's another.
Well, no, I'm just trying, I didn't see everybody's proposal. I'm not going through everybody's proposal like you guys are. But it seems in a roundabout way, kind of like what the county and the city did with the Pell, but not with, it's a different scenario. So I just hadn't heard. So this is, everybody put in for the full project, and then you're saying, what if we just did design only to get the project going?
I think for some projects, it makes a lot of sense. I don't like the DOT list, just from a broken standpoint, but I do like the idea of funding potentially some design only. I look at a $10 million Zim Smith Trail project. It's not happening. We can't fund that in this program.
Well,
You
there'll
might
be
be
further
able to fund
discussion on
design. You
that.
might
Steve just.
You might be able to fund design.
Well,
So, we just don't have the money to build, Zim Smith might be a great project, $10 million, we have no money left.
This
How much funding is for design only? And what proportion of the DOT pot or proposal?
nice round number, $500,000 for each. So.
Roughly, yes, roughly half a million for each.
About just shy of 5 million. A couple of them are just a little under, 4.8, 4.6.
Greg, did you
4.6.
take this to the next level while looking at it? Like, I'm looking at a lot of them are intersection safety. So I don't know about the 60 programs that are coming out, but I do know pretty well the existing programs that are out there with your bridge, TAP, CMAC, there's a couple, but did you look at like, how would you propose if you did design only these intersection safety? You think that would be some upcoming TAP, CMAC? Is that what it would be? Is that because you got to have a thought of where it's going to go, right?
CMAC is my first thought, but, I know some of the highway bill talks about congestion, prevention, and I'm sure, hoping one of the 66 is a congestion mitigation solicitation,
So that's the idea behind this, to get enough of an in-depth analysis of the the cost benefit of the roundabout to get it to the next.
shovel ready.
The other element here is my concern for design, and I'm speaking specifically for a project that we have, which we originally were considering as an amendment to an existing project. Now, the issue here is that we would be doing the existing project that's on the tip and the intersection project as proposed jointly as an economy of scale and savings. We would combine the two projects. A design only does not progress us on the same track as the existing project for construction. So, that's just another issue. If you have a timing element where one project that is funded is going to mesh or merge with another, that design only might not be the most viable option.
See,
Joe had a point next.
Sorry, I agree with the validity of design only in certain circumstances, but I think you have to really look at total cost of the project and where those funding sources are coming from. We keep talking about 60+ discretionary programs. What are those programs? What are the funding limits? Are we going to have to put 2 or 3 grants together to make this happen in the future? Because that could kill the project, and I've had a couple already die in the past couple of years over this. So that's a concern for me when we're talking just design.
Where you had a
Well, I
point?
also want to just add, I mean, sure, there's discretionary programs at the federal level, but then there's also statewide solicitations to consider. It's going to be probably about 200 million just for bridges. annually.
Well, there's not a lot of bridge here though. That's like the Zim Smith Trail. The problem like a Zim Smith Trail is you're like, we need $10 million, and then that state program comes up, they're like, we can get 10,000.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, well, I need a lot of those.
There's also going to be like what is it? There's also going to be tax even at some point as well, from the statewide fund. So, kind of preparing for, kind of think holistically about all the different fund sources, and how, this table could think about ways to prepare each other for this.
But that's the
opportunities ahead.
so consideration in those is the fact that we're dealing with something that we're gonna make concrete now. The ones you're coming up with, we don't see till there's an election or till there's, and I'm not being facetious. They're long-winded before they get to anybody with monies and stuff. That's just something on a local level to think about. You're not gonna have your monies
I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to this question. I'm sure everyone else does. How long can these grants stay open? I'm just thinking about, if you don't get the funding for construction, you'll need to do the design, the cost estimates closer to when you're getting ready to issue the bids.
Theoretically, indefinitely, then.
So if it's, can you set aside money for the cost estimating and the bid documents at the end?
I think the short answer is, there's always a risk, right? And this is the decision that not only the folks in this room would have to consider if we were going to fund any projects, not even necessarily the ones being proposed, but any of these projects for design only, we would need to confirm that with the sponsor. Is the sponsor comfortable with that? Maybe the sponsor says, nope, not willing to take that risk. Because you guys know you have to front the money for federal aid. So, it's an interesting idea that's going to require a little bit of thought. From our staff perspective here, and I'm just going to switch gears off of the design only piece for a second. Looking at the other aspects of the NISDOC proposal for a second. This is the only one of the three that doesn't really relate to the evaluations we did. And that certainly is a concern for staff. We spent a lot of time working with you folks on developing an evaluation process. We want to make sure that there's some respect to that as much as this is staff talking. Ultimately it's your decision. In this scenario, absolutely. Most of the local governments likely would get their number one priority. But what does that mean for our evaluation process? Why did we even do it? So bear that in mind as you're thinking through how we want to approach this.
Russ, did you have a point?
The only really quick thing to, I'm biased person. We don't have a. But is, I was literally gonna. Is what you're trying to do with the design only is mix what I think is the concept of creating another set aside that is for design of projects. You're mixing it into the selecting which project we fund it. What the committee may want to do is say, I don't know, it's 5 million, whatever amount is. Hey, break that off from the tip. That's design money that anybody can go after. Compete for, break that off. And then everything you talk about today is just solely on what are the projects you want to fully fund. Because I think what DOT is doing is a great idea. It's just mixing two things, two steps all into one.
Like if right in the beginning, we knew that we were gonna just apply for design funding because the project was in that state, then I think that would make more sense, because you would know that's what you're applying for.
Sandy, my suggestion was, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I was just gonna ask, we're gonna have a lot of questions.
Yep.
Right? And I was just wondering, could we, if the committee's okay with it, like DOT talked about this list, CDT's talked about this list, say how you got to this list, and then we talk?
Yeah.
Is that, because you're bringing up points, and I feel like we're gonna
No,
talk about each
and
list
we
for
do
an
not-
hour, and then we're not gonna.
Absolutely. We do not have to make any decisions today.
You have a hard deadline. I like to hear how each list was done, and then we can just, because we're not voting on it once the list is done.
Absolutely fine.
Set the stage, contact.
Yeah.
Rob, did you have a follow-up?
Two quick questions. So for the design, it's still an 80-20 match, so the town would have to contribute, or the town would contribute 20% of the design, 80% comes from. Okay, and then second, I think there are merits in looking at design. I've been through several projects where you go back after the project is done and say, I wish we would have had more information to build in our cost estimate prior to getting all the money for construction, right? And there might be overruns and unexpected costs. This might kind of help, sharpen the pencil on. You have a design, and then you can get into cost estimate more. So I'm not, from my perspective, I'm not opposed to it. I think it's an interesting approach and might serve some projects to advance.
So that was a great point that I appreciate Rob making, that's why we want to encourage the use of this. By no means when we create this, that we expect this many design onlys to get selected. This was a first slice, just idea. To move off the design part, the thoughts in this is, as it gets after everyone's first priority, it does get after the various goals. Each project does still have merit per the long-range plan, and every project does support the long-range plan as best it can. So some of the limitations of projects are based on location. These can't get merit from where they are, but they all do have some merit. But they also get after the federal performance measures in some facet as well. So that's the overall view of our first slice. Suggested. So
Sorry, one more question. What's the timing? So if you go through design only, the timing of some of these new federal discretionary monies, do you have to complete that design by a certain period? And if you don't, you're gonna miss the boat on these funds coming in for construction.
as I see it, the projects are scored on deliverability. So if you didn't start a design, your deliverability is very, very low, and you're incredibly unlikely to get even selected. If you're through NEPA, if you have a NEPA determination and you know your right of way and you know exactly what you need, or you know you don't need right of way, and you can 100% certify that, your deliverability is, you're going to jump right to the
I
top.
guess my question is more related to funding sources that are coming up and the solicitation for that, and the timing of that compared to when a municipality has to get through design in order to then apply for those new funds. And if you miss that window of completing your design, you've missed maybe a 2 or 3 year, kind of solicitation, and you're waiting another 4 years
I
to
know
get that construction loan.
I know the state run ones are about every 2 years, and the federal ones seem to be starting. I don't know if they're going to be cyclical, but I know they're starting to roll out. And so I don't know.
There's a schedule that has just come out, that's going to be adding more to it. But I did send that link to all of the MPO directors and also your main office as well.
But I'm gonna be honest with you, most of the information, there are several programs, for example, coming out in May. The application would be due in 2 months. It's not like you have 2 years, to your point. You're not gonna have 2 years to prepare. If you're not shovel ready right now, and by shovel ready, I mean, if you don't already have your design done right now, it's not that you're not gonna be able to apply. The question on the sponsor level is, how competitive is my project gonna be? And there's a lot of work to apply for these funds, and that's just the group of projects coming out in May, and there's more programs coming. But these funds won't be available to you until after October 1st, 2022. So keep that in mind as we discuss. Mark and then Ryan.
Sure, just thinking about, again, capacity and competitiveness. Is there an option to use either this money or planning funds to do a centralized procurement for an on-demand vendor who could provide cost estimating, grant writing services for communities? So that the communities, particularly the ones that don't have a lot of capacity, don't have to procure a vendor for cost estimating, grant writing, et cetera. And then we'd all sort of be working on the same template towards the same goals. I'm just throwing it out there. I'm not sure if anyone has to do that.
AGFTC does.
That's a great idea.
We can certainly do that, but again, that would be a UPWP item for next year. So that won't help you this year, is my point.
Did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was just, a lot of these questions that have been asked, is the scheduling, design, getting the design on year one, start off with that. Goal. And, saying funds aren't to be held in October, then you guys start the design process. But I agree, process. Process again. 3 or 4 years. I think it's a gift for certain projects. My project particularly is expensive. Something we can't do with piecemeal.
So just some other aspects of the DOT. Can I just make a couple points, and then we'll get back to discussion, just because I know there's a lot of things embedded in all of these proposals that we wanted to walk through. You'll notice at the very bottom of this proposal, there's something called an HSIP set aside. When I said at the beginning that we're being fund source neutral, I wanted to make sure that we pointed that out. As I said earlier, that the safety funds are most challenging fund source in the core programs to use because it's a data-driven program that requires some work on the part of the sponsor to access. They have to do a lot of documentation, draw collision diagrams, develop a benefit cost ratio. And a lot of that work needs to be done by the sponsor upfront to even access these funds. So looking at the set of proposals that we received, as of now, we do see some potential candidates for safety funds within the mix. But the only one that's already done the legwork to qualify for HSIP is a DOT-led project on the Swatling Road intersection. So that is why I just wanted to point that out. In all these scenarios, we're treating the highway safety planning, highway safety improvement program funds a little differently in these scenarios.
Is the 7 million estimate based on that one project or that and a little cushion?
That and a little cushion. Yeah, we do see some potential local candidates, but the legwork would need to be done to qualify.
Can you, because that was one of the questions I did want to bring up, because I've got a number of towns that are within that. So qualifications in terms of what that they have.
So the department, and you guys can explain it a little bit, but
To qualify for HSIP funds, you have to do a full benefit cost ratio of crashes to crash reductions of the solution. So if your proposed project will reduce crashes by X and the value of those crashes is Y, that's the benefits. And if your benefits exceed your cost, if you're 1.0 or better, you could use HSIP. But it's an analysis that has to be done in a very specific way.
It's more in depth than solicitation.
correct. It's
Collision diagram.
yeah, the time consuming piece of it is really drawing the collision diagram, and that's an engineering activity that just, if you have a location with a lot of crashes, can take a lot of time to do. And the whole point is to establish a pattern.
These, and I'm looking at 6 towns within that grouping there. So what they have submitted does not have that information in there now.
Correct. We have a general 10,000-foot view of, we pulled how many crashes have occurred at each location. We have some summary data in terms of the pattern of crashes, but what you really need to do, access this particular fund source, is physically draw a collision diagram and do that additional analysis. And that's just the procedure, fortunately or unfortunately, that the department has adopted for the state. That's a procedure that might change in the future, but this is the procedure we have to live with for now.
My last speaking point was just. No, this is my last. So the sheet is here.
Oh, okay, all right.
I just wanted to make the point on here, this one, the DOT sheet, and we had met with in the county level and talked about it too. In the county, even the county had lost 2 projects in this scenario versus what they would have picked up with CDTC. The thing is it does provide for a spread over, just as I said, these other 6 municipalities locally. In that regard, the county has, they've already stated that they're supportive of this one. Although they lose 2, they like what can be spread to the other municipalities. And it's picking up, just as Bob and Greg started out at the beginning, you're picking up your top rated or ranked projects. So I just throw that out. I had to take care of Steve's comments down there, so that was my way of doing it.
That's quite all right.
Okay,
Did anybody listening in online have any comments that they would like to add to the conversation?
Are the next steps to go to each project that's on this design only and verify that they like that idea, they would be willing to do that and then come back and see what's left?
I think we'll have to have some additional conversation after we talk through the other 2 scenarios.
Saying the only point I would make sure that everybody who's on this design only understands, that's my problem with design only in general, is that if if it was, I don't know about 10 years ago, but if it was previous, we're gonna give up our authority when we go design only in a way. It's like, you know, I have bridges that could go on Bridge New York, I have projects that go to TAP CMAC, but it does not come back to this table. Once we go up to the higher powers that be, with our applications, there is a chance for disappointment. There is a chance for, I did everything right, I did all the boxes, and I wasn't awarded. Because we don't have a say, we don't even regionally have a say. They're gonna send our stuff to Region 6. You know, and they're gonna ask Region 6 to evaluate what we all talked about and make decisions on. So,
Here's your need, but you get a lot of extra credit.
if we can try to put a path together, you know what I mean? That would be great. But that's the frustrating part of it, is that these set asides come out, and instead of coming to this table and say, hey, set asides here, and we already know this, and this are on the docket, and we know what's best for our region, we're gonna ship it off.
Is there any discussion that you've heard informally of state appropriate additional funding outside the tip for transportation projects? Anybody heard money becoming available?
Beyond the touring route program?
Yeah. Well, it might be touring. It's just, there's been some rumblings, but
Touring route. Chip, I'm gonna call it just chips plus paver potholes, where the winter, harsh winter.
Extreme winter recovery, paving New York, you got the new pothole program. But the problem is, I think for some of a lot of people sitting around, we have no idea what that dollar amount is
right,
that we're getting right now. I mean, those letters usually come towards the latter part of April. So it's a challenge for us right now. I'm trying to figure out, okay, what am I planning for over the next long term, maybe short term, 2 years, maybe long term, 5 years. And it becomes a challenge because I don't know when these additional programs are coming out. We don't know what's available. And it's difficult to kind of gauge of, okay, what's, even looking out 5 years, this touring route program, my understanding is going to continue this year, but is this a program that's going to persist like CHIPS? That
It's listed in the 5-year budget, but the budget's only actually 1 year, so. But it is.
But
listed in the
you know,
file.
and I've said a number of times here, CHIPS, too many municipalities live off the CHIPS program, and there's no revenue stream behind it.
It's
Now,
like Social Security.
well, there are revenue
Revenue
streams,
stream,
you know, it's, yeah, I mean, we certainly don't know. I mean, the governor's proposal talks about a 5-year program bill, and it's all of those programs were included for those 5 years, but you know, what next year's budget, correct?
The one thing I just wanted to say is on the DOT scenario, I did want to acknowledge that the pavement preservation is actually, well, the pavement beyond preservation has more funding allotted to it than the pavement preservation. So we are moving away from the classic, focus on pavement preservation. And I think that's a necessary look ahead, and the fact that it actually is coming to light now is a good thing.
Well, maybe it served its purpose too.
Quick
That you'll have
question.
That we try to water
5
off.
years ago or
Add that
something.
point.
Yeah, the 3 scenarios have different grand total costs. Can you guys talk through that quickly? I think the DOT was at 198, the CDTC were 180, 187.
The DOT shot over a little bit because we recognize that several of our suggested in our scenario are in for TAP awards. And if those TAP awards happen, it'll bring it right back to balance. If they all don't get awarded, likely we'd be a little short, so we can figure that out. We're close. That makes.
And the CD, just to finish, from the CDTC side, we purposely left some money on the table for a couple of reasons. One, we have to work through a public involvement period. And we want to be able to have some flexibility in programming after we hear from the public. Two, to account for some of the discussion we're having today. What if we did have a design set aside? What if we had some of these other options on the table? Give you folks some flexibility in programming, and it's always best not to program to the dollar even at this stage of the game. Again, just to preserve some flexibility. So that was our thinking.
is.
On some of these projects that are CMAQ tap eligible, and it's a project that's applied to CMAQ tap. If there's support for a design only here, is a town, municipality now taking themselves, is that sending a message to DOT to remove yourself from that CMAQ tap?
No.
And how do we?
The TAP CMAQ decisions have been made.
They have been.
Apparently, we're awaiting the press release any moment. Any day.
We'll find out.
Don't hold your breath, but any day.
We've been, I feel bad for these two because this is the same line that they've said every week to me. So what's going on with the tip? Well, we're waiting.
So that's me. So what happens today or the next meeting is not going to, because the decisions are made.
If this committee picks a project that's also in for TAP.
Yeah.
With the TAP, if the TAP gets announced, that funding now does not count against our core anymore.
We're sort of hedging, we'll know that answer before October.
And so TAP fully funds the full
Before
project.
policy
TAP
committee
will fully fund
votes
the
on
whole
this.
project. It's not that it is design only is now with like.
The design only basically goes away, and the full project is now funded from
Yeah.
elsewhere.
Sandy and Bob, I don't know if this, is there a way to, we're a committee, right? We have all the elected officials, we're all friends and colleagues here. Would it be possible to stack the deck? Would the DOT know what you're doing? Like you go through it, a Bridge New York application comes out, right? And you say a handshake agreement among colleagues that Bridge New York applicants have to have some kind of support of the group. So then you're only putting in, so we're not all competing on each other again. I'm just wondering, like, can you put the power back at this table in some way and away from the governor's office? Is that possible?
Answered your own question.
Did you hear?
All things possible. Somebody would have voted.
Yeah, I'm just,
It's a.
you'd have to get buy-in from everybody, you just have to, tap you, yeah, you have to get a letter from the executive director and you have to get a letter from the DOT and then, okay, you don't give them the letter if they don't come here and get the.
I think you'll see by even the program candidates that we submitted. I mean, we're still preservation bound in our thing. I mean, we have one pavement project that gets into the beyond preservation category. So it's certainly from a region's perspective, I'm not saying the agency, I mean, that's sort of where our program lies. I mean, even to get a bridge replacement project, it theoretically competes against statewide for our statewide structured asset team to say that, yes, that's a good candidate project, even to get placed into our program. So the flexibility of not being bound by preservation is really good at the table right here, but those are not the rules that we have to play with next door.
And to be fair, I've spoken to the other MPOs across the state, we're all in the same situation, and I think, look, if an elected official, your counterparts, don't like the process, there is a way for them to go on record about that. You can submit a comment during the tip and the stip public comment period. You can write a letter to the commissioner. You can write, but it would have to come from those folks. If you don't like the process being done here, because I'll be honest, the MPOs are quite concerned that we aren't having more of a say in a lot of the use of the federal funds that come into the state. We may all agree that those 4 mega projects, I-81 and the others, are worthy projects. We have no say in them. That's $4 billion of federal aid that none of us had any say in programming. So, from an MPO perspective, we feel that there is a reason to be concerned about the process. It really would be the elected officials that would have to voice their concerns.
Well, I mean, even broader than that now with the new federal bill and an influx of discretionary program. They are not looking to the MPOs nationally to implement the spending, infrastructure spending.
Yep, absolutely. So, there's, I feel for these folks because they have to come here and represent the department's perspective. But it's pretty high up in the state's budgeting process and capital programming process that these choices are being made. And again, none of us MPOs, including NIMTEC, has any real say in what's going on.
How many projects are on both lists? How many projects are
96.
said, well, no, it
So
said to be
there's-
funded by both, where they overlap?
I didn't
Right.
add that up before we walked in the room, but I would say there's at least, we match on about, I think the dollar value, I think we match on about 110. Jacob's gonna work his wizardry on the spreadsheet here to show you guys.
The only reason I'm bringing it up is
Yep.
if both ways of evaluating, which I think we do have to stick with the CDTC way, because that's what we all voted on, right? But for opinion, either way, if the both lists overlap and both recommend funding, it's much easier to get at least something done today.
Yep.
And say where they overlap, those ones get funded, because both ways of evaluating to see what they're worth. Not design only off to the side, not talking about.
And we do overlap on a lot of the projects. So, you know, if we want to walk through the other two scenarios a little bit, and then I can talk through some of the differences. And Jacob will
Well, I guess
describe which ones
to
are
answer that
all of them.
question,
Yep.
we've got 23 that are on all three lists. 2 of those are design only on the DOT scenario, so 21 total overlap.
In response to Ross, and looking at the time and the time constraints that we've imposed, I recommend, let's meet next week, and that's all we do. Let's use the remaining time here to discuss, okay, if this is an approach we want to go, look at overlaps as being a preferred project to consider, or if you're looking at funding sources and looking at percentages applied, saying we want, 10% of the bike ped to apply, we want, we want this, that, we want the other thing in kind of like a piecemeal percentage application or something else. But I think we need just to devote ourselves to the selection process, to the programming process as a session, rather than starting something and then coming back to it. But again, in that time, we can consider methodologies and approaches to doing that the most efficiently and the most fairly across the
Are you
board.
saying carry on and let's keep reviewing the next 2 scenarios? Are you saying right now carry on? and
To
do the other
consider
2
for
scenarios?
the actual programming meeting, yes.
So if y'all are in agreement on that concept, that we'll meet next week to actually take the actions and have that additional discussion, we're fine with that. Let us walk through these other scenarios and describe them a little bit, and then everybody can digest it. We'd be happy to obviously answer any questions you have. So as Jacob just said, you said 21 projects are on both lists, but
Correct.
2 in the DOT list being design only.
But it's 23 total.
Sorry,
21
23.
is the total, just full yes.
Now you're saying both lists being both CDTC list or?
Oh, all three,
All three
actually.
lists.
All 3 of them.
Yep.
Covered DOT, next up, which CDC?
So we'll move to the CDC evaluation scenario, and it is exactly as it reads. This really fully respected the evaluations as presented with some consideration of geographic balance. So we went through the scores of each project and kind of went more or less straight down the list. In a few cases, like City of Schenectady and Saratoga County had a number of projects that ranked well. So for the purposes of geographic balance, we may have swapped out a Saratoga County projects for, say, something in Rensselaer County, because we had very few proposals overall in Rensselaer County. So we attempted to bring some balance that way. We, again, from staff perspective, this is the one that would be sort of the more traditional approach here, that just respects the evaluations.
Say the other one, this is evaluation with balance?
This is just evaluation. The balance comes in only
Next
with the geographic balance.
So with respect to that, so looking at the intersection safety programming.
Yep.
For the programming, or for the evaluation and then the balance. So there's projects 1 and 2 ranked on 1 and then 9. And then the balanced lessens that to 2, and it's 2 and 9. So here's my issue here. We have a project that really is our primary of all the projects, primary, and it's number 3 on the intersection. So DOT has considered it for design, but then it's dropped off because nothing further is considered on the balanced or the rated. Yet on both the evaluation and balanced, a number 9 comes in for full funding.
So when Troy proposed, you indicated your number 1 was Federal Street.
I think we did both because they're different funding sources as one.
It was overall for my sponsor, so you guys had a different, but
Okay.
that's neither here
Yeah,
nor
yeah.
there, but the scenarios did at least attempt to bring some balance into this, and we went with the town of Wilton project and the town of Saratoga County project in that intersection category, because we knew that the Swatling Road was the only one that qualified for HSIP. So we were only suggesting 3 projects in that category.
The only reason number 9 shows up because it's gone through the HSIP process, which is
Right.
If it doesn't get funded, it's money that can't be used elsewhere.
Right.
If you had it, yes.
So this CDTC evaluation scenario is the one that most closely relates to the actual evaluations undertaken. Now, you folks know who've been around the table for many years. Your city of Schenectady, and let's just say, oh, we go down the list. I'll just pick on the bike ped category for a second. Let's just say you get to project number 3, Schenectady Park Connector, and the city says, that we'll pass on that, or swap it out for something else. I mean, there is negotiations that happen even within these scenarios. But this one, like I said, most closely follows the evaluations, with the exception of getting something in Rensselaer County.
Did they apply? They didn't apply for anything, or they did?
The county itself had 0 applications, and there were very few from the other sponsors. City of Troy had the most. Even the department had very few proposals in Rensselaer County. So there was just overall, it just not a lot of candidates were put forward in Rensselaer County.
The city of Schenectady supports the CDTC in their thorough evaluation process, and we have no issues with moving forward with this list. Right now, motion. If anyone wants to second my motion.
That's the evaluated one?
The evaluated, I have thorough trust in the CDC staff and their means and methods. Not your shady DOT characters over there.
Noted.
Thank you.
We move to the 3rd.
Yeah, so the balanced approach, kind of gets, so the NISDOT folks have some state, I'll call it state priorities for the region that this scenario acknowledges, which doesn't respect necessarily the evaluation. So for example, they mentioned the Route 7 rehab project, which is in Rensselaer County. In our evaluation, if you look at the sponsor priority by project for the pavement beyond preservation, so this is project number 47. In our evaluation, it was one of the lower ranked projects, but we know it's a priority for the state. It's also one of the only Rensselaer County projects. We know the regional significance of Route 7. So it would make sense to have a project like that in the mix, right? So this scenario just kind of moves the cards around a little bit to get some of those projects that have maybe the state's priority. And we sort of maintained, again, the local priorities respecting the evaluations. But again, we tried to balance it out a little bit more by sponsor and by project type.
It's just regrettable that when you have something like that occur, it skews it so largely,
right,
that the smaller projects suffer as a result.
Exactly.
So something like
That's
this,
that
Route
project?
7, yeah.
Yeah, all right.
You got 13 million that, boom.
It's a
mean,
big
that's,
dollar value.
that's
project.
4 or 5
Are we,
potential projects.
are we overthinking the room on that one with the regional equity? I mean, Rensselaer County didn't put in, it's the DOT's 25th ranked project. It's $13 million. I don't, we can't, are we putting too much into the regional equity?
Well, it's, you know, you look at the ranking, the whole reason we have that ranking process is to look at the merits of the project as presented. I've got a project that's a number 3 that's not being considered, but a 17 is, you know, it's something like that has to be considered when we start moving things around.
Well, I think that's the questions that we want to go into after
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
I've got one, the same thing. I've got a complete reversal and what a sponsored priority. And it's not one that just, they may only put 2 under that category. And then CDTC's rating on it, it's just like, yeah. So I'm sitting here saying, I don't understand, that, but that's what I'd like to go in for
Yep.
beyond today or whatever, just how does that come about?
Which time remaining do we have?
Uh,
If you want, we could take what we're describing a little bit of a step further today and just talk through by the project category. Specifically, the projects that sort of got a yes in the 3 scenarios and the ones that didn't, and the differences why. I would say because the TAP CMAC announcement hasn't been made yet, we can put a pause on the bike ped category and the intersection category, because that's where the TAP CMAC projects live. And then we can come back to that once we see what the announcement is. So for today, we could focus just on the 2 bridge categories, the 2 pavement categories, and the other. The other category, the category of 1, that doesn't have a code.
It did
So-
rank 1.
So could you sort,
One submission.
start with the bridge beyond preservation?
There was one just a sheet by itself and other.
Okay, so hopefully everybody's seeing on their screen right now, the bridge beyond preservation category and the projects that have, in the 3 scenarios, gotten a yes for funding. So, the theme here is if it got a yes on DOT's list and it got a yes in the CDTC list, then the evaluations were consistent with the desire of the department to have those projects funded. So there is a reason why, coming back to a point someone made earlier, that there would be worthwhile support for those projects. So the ones obviously that we're looking at here, Route 32 bridge in Saratoga County over Fish Creek, the I-87 exit 16 interchange, and keep in mind the interesting piece of information on that exit 16 bridge is that there were some freight funds assigned to that at the statewide level. So this proposal with the balance essentially would be filling that gap of what wasn't funded in that freight program. So there's merit to certainly considering that project for many different reasons. The route, my eyes are gonna go, but I think that says, thank you. Route 396 over the Clemens Creek, Nelson Avenue extension over the Northway, and then replacing the Route 146 bridge over Chrysler Avenue in Rotterdam. So those 5 scored well and were high priorities on the part of the department. Where we differ in these lists is really the scoring. So in the case of the Route 29 bridge over the DNH, it was on the DOT list, I believe, and not on our local lists. Actually, it was on none of the lists, and maybe that wasn't a priority for the department.
Correct. We jumped over that one.
So there's an example where the sponsor is saying, we have other priorities and we'll skip that even though it evaluated well. The next one is Crane Street in Schenectady. CDTC had it on its 2 lists. The department didn't have it on its list. The Dimnick, if I'm saying that correctly,
Yeah, Dimnick.
Road Bridge, thank you, is another one that DOT did not have on its list, but CDTC had it on its list. And that's simply because of the evaluations. Those 2 bridges scored very well. The bridges are important to everybody. So from the staff's perspective, we were proposing that they be considered for funding in the program.
What's the funding? Is that
The total funding for those two bridges is about almost 6 million. The Crane Street is the, yeah, those two. That's, yeah, just over 6.
Some of the overlap, it seems like it's a very low priority. DOT, 87 makes it 16. That's an overlap. It's
You know,
31. Is that
so-
like reading that right? That's 31st.
Because we put in so many projects, we tried to put in our top priorities first, but at some point we just went in order. You know, our top 10 are probably in true priority order. But then we also rejiggered because we also put these in before we knew even our funding. So we had to do a lot of jumping around.
Like I said, that's a big number. You got it as 31. Sounds like there's already money committed to it, and that you just sit there if you don't come up with extra money.
No, that won't sit there.
Okay.
That was ranked before we got the extra money.
So Greg, the ranking used for the DOT sheet is the ranking that CDTC provided?
The sponsor priority is what DOT submitted all the way back in October, or however long ago it was now, which things have changed.
Things continue to evolve since then. Between then and now, we received $12 million of freight funds towards 16.
Right.
So that puts it, now that we have other money committed to it, that puts it.
So it wouldn't be 31.
No,
it
it's
would jump up.
1A.
Oh, you're okay.
Oh.
All right.
It's 1A now, with other money to it.
Yes, Steve,
That's what I'm trying to get at. is-
I was gonna bring that up, I don't know, these are public documents, I don't know if we want to redo something on it when it goes public, but between number 31 at 9, and then number 28 at 15, and then number 25 at 12, you know, then your 25th, your 28th, and I'm just looking at the list, because I was looking at where the big numbers are, like your huge numbers at your 20s projects, you know, so it's, and then you see on here, you know, 20s, 2.7, I know it's withdrawn, but you see these other numbers are, they're less.
Yeah.
You know, so I'm just trying to make sure that if there is a new categorization, maybe that we put that out there when it goes public. I just,
Just a revised.
yeah, just
Yeah.
revised, I just, because everybody else here is like, you're trying to get their 1 and their 2. All right, and then the state, we're like 31 ranked, 28 ranked, you know, it just looks,
Well, the problem,
Right.
we should have ranked them by category. We did sponsor priority, period, and because of the crossing categories, at some point we just went to work.
okay, yeah, I'm just saying, maybe we want to revise for public.
Well, there's always been DOT's procedure for cost benefit analysis, right? Which does not mesh directly with CDTC's. So I'd be interested in knowing what DOT's rank is when looking at the projects.
Our rank is based much more heavily on asset condition, and then, of course, traffic volume does play a part, but condition and, you know, condition is the main driver, how much service life is left, and we need to get after it.
But I mean, that historically, you know, prior to the metrics that CDTC has for assessment, that's what was always used. So I'm still, you know, half of my mind is programmed into, well, that's the understanding of how these things are assessed. But a balanced approach, both from the perspective of DOT and the NPO, in assessing what ultimately gets onto the tip is something that I think would be valuable.
And
So where we diverge, you know, again, NISDOT took the Route 29 bridge off the table. It's not a high priority for them. Is on the Riverview Road Bridge, and the proposal for a design-only project on one of the Saratoga County bridges. So let's talk about Riverview Road for a second, you know, getting to this point of how it's being evaluated. So from the department's perspective, it's based on, again,
It's based on an ongoing project right now to replace Cedar Way Avenue. Riverview is the next bridge that is the same height. So one is out of the way.
So in our CDTC evaluations, one of the things with all of the different factors that go into the assessment is, the redundancy of the system, right? The value of the bridge, are there alternative routes? So since they're rebuilding Citterley Road right now, and we know that'll be a brand new bridge, the model shows, well, there's alternate routes. So it decreases the benefit on, the benefit side of the equation on a road, on a bridge like that one. So that's why it goes lower down on the list than some of these others.
What is the condition of that bridge?
It actually been hit a couple times, but it outside of its height, it does have some service life left. We'd like to get this on like the 5th year of the program, if it got programmed, so that it's not 4-year committed, but at least it's in the 5th. We'd like to start designing it because of the known risk, and it also, the other layer of that is called the straw net, which is the interstates are supposed to be up to a 16-foot clearance up to a certain point north. And this will be the last one that's below 16 feet until exit 17 is getting out of the way.
Did you put that one on design only?
Somewhere in
I think that was,
curiosity.
why not design only as a nice proposal?
It's a good question. That is a good question.
You guys didn't have any design only proposals, right? When I looked at it.
Right. We didn't. There's actually the one above it, Route 4 of the Hudson, is actually being designed with state funds. So we are progressing several of our unfunded projects with state funds outside of the process. That's another. So we're doing the same thing, just without federal money.
And you know that budget now, or is that a number that's coming online soon as you go forward with the program?
Which budget?
For non-CDTC funding, for state funding that can be applied to certain projects like these.
I could find it. I mean, we've started Route 4. There's a couple others that were started. So Route 4 probably got $1.5 million of state funds designing it right now.
It would be useful to see that. You are spending money on that project.
But does that reduce these numbers, or it's just, it uses that to get to these
It
numbers?
uses that to get.
Okay. So
For Route 4.
And that's not an in-house regional decision. That even though it's state money, it would come from the statewide pot to be competitive at some point for solicitation for those projects. So we don't have the discretion to just program 1 through 6 on big is for ones of that magnitude.
But Riverview, we can't commit to design only immediately, but we'll consider that one. I mean, it's a proposal was put in year 5. But we can consider that as this evolves.
So the good news story is that we align pretty closely in this category. I think the Riverview Road Bridge is the question mark. So let's move on to the bridge.
Where does it stick Crane?
Sorry?
Where does Crane fall?
So Crane in the DOT scenario, Crane
Is off.
is off, as is Dim Road Bridge in Sargent County. In the CDTC scenario, they would be there. And again, that's because of the evaluations.
Right. Okay, I just know what we're just looking at the category.
Yeah.
Because, we just did it, right? For $1.8 million, you can put in a laser detection overhead vehicle system with a turnaround, and that will leave $5 million for the city's connected. Think about it. Yeah, or others. Hey.
Oh, where do you turn them around on the north?
That's your problem.
The back taxi.
Okay, let's move to the bridge preservation category, talk through that one a little bit. So here again, we.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just highlighting the whole three.
So in the CDTC balance scenario, you know, we would say or give Saratoga County the Heath Road Bridge. We didn't have it in the evaluation scenario only because there were already so many other Saratoga County projects in other categories that we just skipped over that one for the purposes of developing the scenario, but that can always be brought back in. The two that, you know, the department has indicated need for, which Jacob, is that correct? Because I thought there were two 787s.
There are.
Oh, okay, I see the third one. Okay, I see the third one. So there originally were three I-787 maintenance projects that were big dollar values. I mean, the three together were $50 million going back to the annual available funds. We only had about 75 million per year available, right? The department has since said only two of those 787 maintenance projects are kind of on the priority list, if you will, which reduces that, we'll just say roughly to about $32 million just for those two facilities. You know, as you guys also have probably heard in the media, we received, by the we, I mean collectively, the department got out of the state budget a $5 million allocation for a planning study for 787. So, you know, the optics here in the public realm are going to be a little confusing to the general public because on the one hand, you're like, wait a minute, we're going to be studying this to maybe do something else with it, but yet we're spending all this money maintaining it, right? So I wanted to give you folks the opportunity to describe a little bit about what's actually happening with 787.
So,
You're on.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
Oh, no.
It's something we're gonna all.
You know, it's,
collectively have to
it's,
address.
it's obviously very interesting here, and with the original study that was done basically led that, well, here are some priorities of the next things that should be studied, and the interchange in the South Mall and around the Dunn is certainly something to do. I don't, you know, we don't like spending this kind of money on bridge rehabilitation contracts that are sort of endless to keep that serviceable out there right now. So, you know, even within the context of the larger, that we would say are not really transportation issues, but land use, economic development, the sort of, you know, reimagining of the waterfront, that notwithstanding, the more immediate pressing infrastructure need is around that area itself. So even within the longer term recommendations of the original study talked about, well, the newspaper likes, you know, covered roads and you know, parkland and that sort of thing. There are very fundamental infrastructure elements beneath that, whether it is, you know, the relocation of the railroad or what long-term scenarios with connections to the port, what that would look like, and then the interchange with the South Mall and 787. So, you know, I would like to see with that 5 million, and a lot of partners to be at the table of what the study is going to look like, but around that component here, sort of, all right, what are the economics for some of those scenarios, but at the same time, taking the next steps for the real, as recommended in the previous study, some real engineering into railroad and the interchange sort of pieces to that. So I have no problem to spend 5 million pretty easy, but have you know, the next tangible steps out there. So,
Is the infrastructure in risk of killing people?
Oh, so, no, but without knowing the direction that this is gonna go, the newly announced money, there are still coming immediate needs here to keep it serviceable. And there's one tip project that's existing and then these two, without knowing what direction this new study is gonna go, if the focus is here on the interchange and there's a real plan that is actionable, we could revisit this later, but without knowing which direction that's gonna go, we don't look at this some sort of replacement with the study, then this represents what is needed to keep those where they are.
And then, I mean, those bridges were never anticipated to last this long to begin with. How many more Band-Aids can be applied before a rebuild has to occur?
We're extending the life of all of our 50-year structures well beyond 70. So I don't know which way this is going to go.
But ultimately, a decision
Well, I
needs
guess
to be made going forward by date certain, otherwise we keep status quo.
My fundamental question is, does it make sense to take a wait and see approach now? Or to program the money now and then take a look at it again once the study's done?
You got a chicken and an egg sort of. Randy and I are probably going to drive under this every day.
Yeah.
It looks like it's about to fall down. And if it does, that might as well shut down the port and the city. So you have to have this in place until the 5 million is used. And, I mean, I don't do the studies much, everybody here it is. The study could be 1 year or 7 years. And I mean, the Dunn has emergency work going on right now.
By the way,
not everybody needs to know that. Since I drive over it a lot, I kind of, usually I drive a life jacket just on the front, just in case. That's not gonna help you. That's not gonna help you too far down. I say a prayer.
That's not a
too.
direct quote.
I say a prayer. But actually, speaking of the Dunn or some of the other ones, if, like the Dunn's not on here, so where does that money come from? Will that at some point impact these dollars? Does it come out of a special emergency fund you've got? Which is probably.
What you're seeing today is our state funded where and when emergency.
Okay.
And because of the needs of this existing structure, what we know today, even with the new study, we don't know what direction it's going to go. What we know today, we need to have these funded and committed. Our idea is to put them in years 4 and 5, again, to give us time to revisit. There's still one project that's got to continue moving forward. We know there's no path through the study that gets after this in 3 years. Is that fair? I mean, there's no path forward that isn't suddenly under construction in 3 years. There's too much going on.
And the public's saying, like, all of this on top of the city and the state just spending 10 million on a walking path that not everybody's in favor of, so that you've got a walking path over the highway that maybe in 5 or 8 years, it's gonna have a covered highway right next to it, and then somebody's gonna say, what was the point of doing that? So you got a lot of things, you got a lot of.
Is there a way to, because the issue here, I think, comes down to is if we put it on the tip, even if it's years 4 and 5, we're making a decision on publicly, looking like you're making a decision on what happens to 7 and 7. Is there just a way for us to somehow define 787 money in using the term set aside only because it's just a term to push it off to the side, where you move it off to the side and then make the decision later once you know it? Because I think it would be unwise of us to say that we're going to put $32 million towards maintaining 787 when the way you can read the tea leaves where things are going to go is, obviously 787 or major highways of this nature are not going to continue in most cities of our size. So is there just some way we can put aside money for 787 and state it is to implement whatever the study's conclusions are? So
That's
then,
what we
Greg,
always
you
used
have
the
it.
5th year column for before, and then we
Yeah.
said, we're not doing that anymore.
Well,
So there does
Well,
have to
they
be
have-
something different.
There's a 5th year and there's a post-tip.
Post-tip.
A 5th year would.
No, they're correct. We had a post-tip.
Post-tip.
Figure as standing.
Right.
Right. But if you do fifth year, why not go back to the thing saying, okay, put it in design?
The goal, in order to focus here, it seems prudent to focus here so that publicly there's focus on the interchange and the momentum is there to start at the next good idea.
I think, yeah,
I'm
to
trying to
build
say
up.
this vaguely.
Well, I think I'll try to say it in a different way. You know, I think this will send the public a message of a couple of things. One, the amount of funding that's needed to keep that current infrastructure in a state of good repair, right? We're talking almost $10 million a year. It's a big investment in our region, right? Other things can't be done just to maintain that. You know, I think we know there's an advocacy out there that has a vision for another way of looking at the infrastructure, but we have to really look at a feasible design option. And the bulk of this funding, as you can see, it's the Dunn Memorial Bridge, South Mall Expressway interchange area. That's where the bulk of the funding is going to maintain it in a state of good repair. So can it be designed in a different way?
So, the message is the null alternative here is 10 million a year on average forever. But this is 12% of Region 1's bridge deck area. It's 12% right there.
And we have more interstate mileage and bridge deck mileage than most regions in the state, correct?
Correct. So this focus does really help steer the conversation. Mark.
I just wouldn't steer the conversation without any context. So whatever publicly available documents you put out there, include that bolded footnote about what this money represents and what this, in general, this body's position is that it's not definitive what that money is going to be used for. We take have no opinion right now what the outcomes of the study are, nor do we want to influence conclusions that the study will draw by allocating this money for this work. But it gives you something statement like that.
Yeah.
Just so when Chris Churchill does this research before he writes the next column, we're good.
It's 11:35. Do we want to cover the last two categories for discussion today?
And the final thing I'll just point out on this category is, if you notice, we only got applications from 2 sponsors. So, there's some horse trading that Saratoga County can do if they want to pick one of those bridges because there weren't any other candidates. That's the possibility there. We'll go to payment preservation next, and then we'll do the payment beyond preservation. And then we'll wrap up for today and schedule a meeting for next week. Is that good with everybody?
Yes. Good. So the stage.
And thank you for your patience through this whole process. It's been challenging on many levels. So the payment preservation category, again, project 27, is that it now?
Still in house.
So project 27 was just priority change on the part of the department within this last week, actually Friday afternoon. So that one is no longer in consideration. So you can see again where the DOT scenario and the CDTC evaluation and the balance scenario align, which is a large number of the projects. Where we diverge. Where we diverge is in the CDTC scenarios. Again, respecting the evaluations, we've had Grand Boulevard in Schenectady County as part of our scenarios. And in the evaluation scenario, we also had the City of proposed Bridge Avenue project, which the department did have in their scenario. This department also included the Knox Street project in their scenario, just because of the reach down the list, I think, and we didn't program as many dollars. We just didn't reach down that far. So there isn't a fundamental reason why the Knox Street project isn't in the CDTC scenarios. So in the payment preservation, I think is pretty aligned. If you scroll down, Jacob, I don't think there were any other, so these two. The department did have as priorities for DOT, the 2 slope repair projects. 143 and 5S, with 140, so 43 or 45, I can't see that far. 45. Sorry, bad eyes. So Albany County, Route 145 and 5S in Schenectady County as priorities. But again, they didn't rank well in our evaluations because of the nature of what those projects are. They're fixing slopes and some pavement. So, you know, that's a choice you folks can make. But they didn't make the cut in the evaluation of scenarios. And that's really the fundamental difference in pavement preservation. Any questions on that?
In the, you know, the reason we're proposing to reach so far down is we are giving up some of our highest ranked ones to reach further down to get those. Is really a priority for us. That's the thoughts of why we propose to reach down to those, Route 145 and Route 5S.
Okay.
Just for context.
My eyes must be bad, say, at least you're saying your eyes, because I'm looking at all 3. And the one I noticed up there is just the one county, is the Charlton Road, but I don't see it on either one of the 3. Pavement preservation.
Yeah, we have, you know, it evaluated okay, but we took it out of the CDTC scenarios because of the functional class of the road. Now, if it's a priority on the part of the committee, we can always add that one back in.
I don't even know how big a priority it is with DPW. I
Yeah.
mean, it's ranked in there, but I haven't talked to them about it.
Exactly. So if it ends up being a high
Part of the
priority
homework,
for the county. Talk about that one. Any other questions about or comments on the pavement preservation?
I know I'm just getting into the weeds, but
Yep.
like I just said to Bob, on the slope failures, I know they're way down on the list, but if you don't replace the slope, then you lose the road, or at least the underbit, then you're way past preservation. So at your guys' job to rank those, but for me, that would, you know, if I was driving down Columbia Turnpike and I realized, oh, this is washing out over here, that'd be more important than filling the potholes.
They'd be already filled.
Right. Well, and
The slope
remember,
next to it?
just you know, and I'll say this as a reminder, you know, no matter how we fund some of the department's projects, as they've kind of alluded to already, there's some wiggle room internal to them on the balance between what gets funded using state money and what gets funded using federal money. So just because, you know, let's just say the 5S slope repair is super important to the DOT, they may be able to fund it otherwise. Just saying.
Well, along those lines, I would say, you know, us as a DOT region as well as statewide, would become guilty of deferring those type of investments. And it has been an emergency response activity, certainly with culverts as well as slope repairs, that they're technically tricky and not easily designed. There's right away involved, and there's usually very complicated projects again, and then sometimes you end up just an emergency contractor will clean it up after the fact. And that not just our region, but statewide, that's become the reality of demand response is an alternative delivery method than programming things.
Climate change isn't helping, more
No,
intense rainfall, storms, et cetera.
Oh, come on.
We do the best we can. All right. Are we ready to move forward? Or
Yep.
any other
So let's
discussion? The last category
we'll just
is
discuss this last category and then
beyond
we'll,
preservation, call it a day, be
Yep.
back in a week.
One, while you're bringing that up, request, can you circulate the overlap in a digestible?
yep, we can do that.
Planning committee web page, maybe. That's great. Thank you to staff for excellent web services, emails, as well as website updates. Last category.
Okay, so this is the beyond preservation for pavements. And I think this category probably had the biggest difference between the evaluations and what the DOT proposal suggests. In the strict evaluation scenario, we have the 2 Frisbee Avenue projects and the City of Schenectady's Brandywine McClellan project as our top ranked projects, followed by Central Avenue. because Central Avenue is a large dollar value project, CDTC staff felt we wouldn't consider the Patroon Creek project, even though it is the next one. It's just a really large dollar value project, so we skipped down to then hit the Cohoes, the Troy, the Watervliet, and the Green Island projects. In the DOT scenario, they start with the Central Avenue project. Note the design only on the Cohoes project. Troy would be proposed for Federal Street, followed by the Watervliet for 25th Street and the Green Island project on Arch Street. And then would jump down again to get sponsors as close to their number one priority as they could. Albany County would get Albany Shaker Road. And then Mechanicville would get the Depot Square project. And then the NISDOT Route 7 pavement rehab in Rensselaer County.
Sandy, not that I'm arguing, I was just curious why the Federal Street was classified on beyond preservation as opposed to intersection.
The Federal Street project, because you guys are doing pavement in between, is why it was classified.
I mean,
Jacob can review the description here while we're looking.
that's part, it's the, the potential boulevardization between two potential roundabouts. So that I was just curious because the intersections serve to bookend.
Yep,
the
but you're
other-
still doing the piece in the middle, so that's why it's still considered a corridor project rather than an intersection.
Thanks.
I had a question on the mechanical project.
Yeah.
In the past couple of months, the school district has talked about moving the school bus garage down off of Depot Square. So it'll approximately take, I mean, this is the first roundabout, I think, in the area. It's a 1,000-foot circle, basically. I don't know why they call it Depot Square, but it's been there for however long. And it has 5 city streets that come into this large circle, and you're crossing the paths beyond stop signs and different flows of traffic means. But now, and also, so that's approximately another 40 school buses that'll be traveling in and out of, plus any traffic for the drivers. But also, we're also negotiating with CDTA to staff their flex buses in there. So since we've applied for this, the traffic flow has really had a considerable change in 2 months. So I just didn't know how that reflect our ranking or how we could help our ranking on, because we are on DOT's list, but not on the other 2 CDTC lists. But like I say, in the last 2 months, these negotiations have just shown light. So it's going to become a much more busy intersection with limited traffic signal or flow patterns.
Does the Industrial Park Road also come in there?
Correct. That's where the Industrial Park Road, and we have a developer starting to develop 3 of the lots in there right now.
So, obviously we wouldn't be reevaluating any of the projects at this point, but in terms of the points that you're raising, I mean, that is what you just did is exactly what we would do is, put those considerations on the table. And if the body feels that, that those extenuating circumstances, if you will, would make it, a higher priority for the region, our staff has no problem with that. But yeah, we wouldn't be reevaluating it, and, traffic volume and the nature of what was proposed there, I don't know if it would move the needle that much to make a huge difference in the calculation that we do.
I think we should tie that into the Zim Smith Trail.
It is part of the
It's
Zim
all
Smith
related.
Trail. You have to
It's all
cross the
related.
Depot Square to get to Zim Smith Trail to head north.
And get Steve to say it's a worthy project.
I'm not saying it's not worthy, but $10 million is a big ask.
Sandy, when you do the summary of comparing all this together, can you also say what the amount awarded by sponsor would be under the 3 scenarios? Because that's oh, it's already on.
It's already, I just took the page.
Yep, so there's some summaries tables on the second page of each of the scenarios by sponsor, project type, so you can just sort of see the blend. There is plenty of room for negotiation for changing these scenarios. We just, again, we wanted to give you folks a framework to start with. See where we do agree and where we still have some discussion points. We do have 20+ projects where staff and staff and DOT largely agree on some of the projects. So it's just the balance and how we want to approach it that we would need to think about, and the role of the design only concept and what that would be. You know, if we opt for whether you call it a design only set aside or something, what, you know, what would be the implementation mechanism of that? Would we be soliciting again for design only candidates? Would we be just drawing down on who gets the letter in first? I mean, we would need to work out those details of how that would work. But you know, that's something we can put our heads together, come up with.
And this programming scenario is something that I alluded to earlier when we're looking at how the pie is being cut. So definitely take a look at the project types being allocated and what percentage is being allocated, and assess that with the reality is what, you know, what is necessary, what is driving, what currently needs to be focused on, as opposed to what, you know, is a desire. So I think that might shift a few percentage points here and there.
Sandy, one thing that I would, on the record, thing that I would like on the record stated from the city of Schenectady, from my personal standpoint, is, and it's more directed at my friends at the DOT and people around the table, is that
You really support.
no, what I'm getting at is, listen, we came out with the solicitation. The solicitation was based off of certain things, all right? The city of Schenectady, I did not put forward random projects. I put forward targeted projects that met the needs of the solicitation. I am not surprised that I have 4 when they're evaluated based on the solicitation and 1 based on the DOT. These are 2 fundamentally different programs. This program is, if we go this way, I think it is changing it fundamentally going forward. It is put a number 1 by your program. If you want that, we give it to you. You get number 1. Everybody gets number 1, all right? If that's what we're gonna do, but that's different than this. This is put together things that meet the needs of the UPWP and the program. I spent hours on these damn things, all right? So if we're gonna not do this and we're gonna do this, it needs to come from this group. The group needs to say, we're done with this and we're moving to this. Because I really don't care, but it's the Bridge New York thing. I put in an application under 5. Here comes an award 25. All right, if we're gonna do applications, they have to mean something, all right? The rules have to mean something. So I'm fine with it. And I understand that we need regional equity and everybody has their number 1s. But there's not, like, I looked at this and I told the mayor, killed it. All 4 applications I put in recommended CDTC, look at the scores. I know we're gonna have to negotiate. I know I'm not gonna get 4 projects and $11 million. But at the same time, like, just to go in and go, everybody gets a 1, everybody gets a 1, everybody gets a 1. It's not what we applied for. And if that's what we want to do next time, great, I'm all in for it. But that's not what we did this time.
Some of the anomaly comes up from the fact that something, particularly not counties, all right, or even the bigger cities, but some of the smaller towns that we have make an application and says, okay, how's this rate for the sponsor? We'll only put 1. So their 1's gonna be a 1, you know.
Oh, and I get it, but what I'm getting at is that their 1, maybe when it's evaluated, it may not be anybody's 1. And then we have to address that. I mean, that's what we had years ago with Joe Talisco, which was he wanted a set aside for rural roads. And clearly that didn't work because now Joe's not even at the table. So I'm not saying that we're a perfect committee. I'm just saying what we do and what decisions that we make, we should stand by them and they should go somewhere. And if we don't like the results of the decisions we make, then we should make new categories, make new, you know, we talked about set aside, we talked about things. I don't know how we do it, but right now we're changing things midstream, where we're talking about doing it midstream. And there are no set rules. We can do whatever the hell we want. I'm just saying, I think it's unfair to some of us that put these in for a certain way.
We've always reached down and got certain sponsor priorities. Our proposal was only meant to be talking points because there's no expectation that we just buy DOT's proposal. That was not intended to be the message. We do want, there's been talk of a TIP committee And I think that the can's been kicked on tip committee to talk about this for the future tip updates. But that's not now.
Right.
Yeah.
But the time to do it is not in the tip.
No,
It's not during the tip.
You can tweak what we have on the CDTC end, but it's got to be the basis because of everything Chris just said. Everybody applied based on thinking the criteria was what the evaluation was. And if it changed prior, then I'm guessing Chris and everyone else would apply for different projects. So you have to stick with the CDTC evaluation, tweak that for the geographic coverage or whatever else you want to do. But Chris is saying it's totally right. You can't change rating score after everyone's applied.
And in aggregate, there's actually a lot of agreement across all three, which is does speak some volume, so we're not light years apart, I don't think.
Does it make any sense to any of these three? I was kind of thinking along with CDTC's evaluation as kind of the base, and then we start moving from there. It's the staff, the DOT, do you guys get together? Do we get another list for the next meeting? Does that make any sense, or is that great?
Well,
You know, I mean, because I'm gonna try to send where we, I guess, agree or where the two agree. I mean, should there be an attempt to, okay, based on today's discussion,
we can
here's another
definitely,
list based on our evaluation method and some of the DOT's concerns, and then we can talk about local concerns. You gotta be local. People say, well, geez, I really think, you know, I've got projects that I'd swap out, you know, that maybe one scored higher, and we say, well, you know what, we'll take less money, but we'll take this project, you know, and so I'm sure a lot of that will happen, but we kind of have to get to a spot where it's even doable.
I don't think it diminishes your submissions. I don't think it diminishes all the work that you've done. I think that gives it more credence that it's in the ring to begin with and your ability to support that when it comes up to discussion. So.
I just wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page. Is that I see kind of different, like we're all sitting around, this is my one, this is my one. I just want to make sure that going into next week, we know where we are and if we want to change something. Or if we want to, you know, like to Sandy's point when she said, it's like the DOT looked at it without the evaluations, they looked at it regional, like it's fine. It's just, I want to know what the sandbox is that I'm playing with because that's what I want to do. I want to get these in here. It takes a lot of time.
Yeah, but it's good that you get that opinion. As I was mentioning, you know, historically, prior to the metrics being developed by CDTC, went with DOT. DOT's assessment is looking at certain things that CDTC might not have in its metric as higher rated, but it is important on that perspective, just like our personal representative, you know, discussion point, how we're going to explain things, why this is important, how this fits into something else going on in the city or the town or the village. That's not going to be represented in any score. That's going to be more of a holistic view, and it's up to us to.
Well, that's
to show
that's
how
a point to show it around the table.
Right.
Which comes in and say, okay, some of the discussion could be counter to what is shown in analyses. But I don't think there's anything that we're definitely not short on talking ability here. No, over the years, it's been that way, you know? So that would be some of the things, say, okay, if you're gonna make a sale on a project, you know, start making it. Because I would, like I said, I like what DOT's come up with. And it shows me towns and counties being, as far as CDTCs, I don't know or understand what goes into how the evaluations. I mean, I have categories, but I don't understand. I'm saying, is it geared toward a certain thing? Yeah, if Joe was here, he'd say, oh yeah, it's geared towards cities and, you know, large bridge projects, not small or something. And so those are the things I'm looking at here. I like the aspect of that $500,000 design only, because it allows some things in. You know, how do you work it? I think that offers up an opportunity for a lot of projects that may not be considered in one way.
You know, I don't to that point, we have, excuse me. I mean, we, around the table here, we have cut projects in half or reduce scope around there because of the cost things that were going around. I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, those are the rules that come in, but ultimately the end result there are the staff recommendations, which are intended to be one of the tools that collective that we look at. None of the previous ones have just gone straight down the staff recommendations and there's the project list. I mean, that's the tough work that goes on around this table here. So, I mean, whether the geographic or the project type, or like we're trying to crystal ball some of the TAP CMAQ stuff, or the new realities of being competitive with the way the federal funding is coming out. I think those should be part of the conversation as well here. I mean, ultimately, we did not delegate to staff to pick the projects. I mean, they give a tool for us collectively to select those projects.
And nor did we assume the role of assigning it ourselves.
Right.
We just want to be clear that we didn't come in.
Purposely just for a starting point for the conversation here, right? You know, maybe the balanced approach is the right starting point.
So good discussion, everyone. It's noon. Motion to adjourn. Are we ready, Sandy?
Yeah, and we will, just to answer Steve's question, we will share the information showing the 3 columns where all the scenarios align, so you folks have that as reference. And we'll reconvene in a week.
7 days on the 27th at 9:30. So we move by consensus. And thank you for your support for our positive path forward. Thank you, everyone.
Motion adjourned.
Motion adjourned. Second, all in favor. See you in 7 days.